Hello, all you folks out there in YouTube land. This was just going to be a long comment to someone that had been attempting to argue that his deity is the absolute cause of existence, and even went to the trouble of insisting that we have no purpose without his specific magic sky fairy. I'm betting you can guess what I think of that. Before I get into the actual argument, I'm going to put it into a tiny bit of context. The video this particular silly creature is commenting on is a rather good one. It was posted on a channel that presents debates between various atheists and their theist counterparts. This particular thread came to us by way of a Google Plus community called Comment Hell, from one of its less prolifically posting members. The issue stemmed from our subject, a creature steeped in the finest Hovind tradition. I would take Eric and Kent apart, but with this particular subject, I could just put him through the ringer and get a little bit of ham in the bargain. He makes a number of bold assertions, all of which have been debunked several times using more or less stock arguments. He even tried to drag not just the person who passed the thread to Comment Hell but Kage as well into the several reasonable sounding questions intentionally designed to make the respondent look like an idiot. The first time I saw these, the narrator of the story was an Indian fellow whose name eludes me, with an anecdote about kicking the crap out of a professor at Berkeley. Kent tried the same thing in one of his lectures, and wandered off faster than a 4-year-old with a ADHD that's just spotted a kitten. He rants at several people about his standards for evidence, beginning with "Have you observed evolution?" to Ken's canard about being witness for the development of the universe. He also attempts to conflate a number of fields with evolution, going back to the very beginning of the universe as we experience it. We haven't seen Strabel's yardstick yet, but the thread is young yet. Much as I'd love to run through the entire thread and drive a stake through the heart of every one of his little rants here, that would not only be tedious for me, and more so for Kage, it would also be so for you. In the interests of being at least partially fair, I'll leave a link to the Google Plus thread, rather than its YouTube post. You can decide for yourself whether or not it's worth engaging this particular version of Ken Hovind, or just watch along and see his fail firsthand. At the point where we pick up the thread, he had this to say:
I'm not trying to assassinate your character, or paint you in some stereotype. In fact, that's what you have done with me, and it doesn't hurt any less. You are speaking to a human being, not a machine. Remember that every time you press a key. If you don't believe in God, then fine, don't. It doesn't matter to me what you choose, rather than I'm simply here to question why you do. Science has its limits. Every new discovery means another adjustment to the theories. The Bible has never changed and is still relevant to this very day. Science cannot teach you morality, love, how to understand your connection to another human being, or how to find and communicate with God. Science is simply the study of the observable, testable reality. The study of what God created. Evolution is not science. It never was. Evolution would have you see yourself as meaningless and circumstantial, and all your life efforts as an eventual recyclable waste. You have a soul. You feel it every day. The evolution religion can never let you understand that. That understanding dwells in an entirely different aspect of our humanity. Answer me this honestly: do you believe in God? And if not, do you want proof? And are you honest enough with yourself to receive the answer?
Please forgive the butchering he gave his native language. For the sake of accurate representation, I didn't bother editing it. He said that to Kage after being called on the carpet for trying the questions game, and cherry-picking the answers that Kage gave to suit his narrative. Links for the first 3 Creationist Canards videos were posted, and wound up in the spam filter. Too bad, really, as Debiter and I have covered a lot of the balance of the argument in those videos, and Tylin in yet another that was also linked in the missing post. The video Tylin did was just a sort of ramble on the topic of evolution, and we're going to go at the argument a bit differently, even if the basics are similar. He claims that the Bible is the first and last word, and now it's time to hand him his backside, neatly severed and prepared, just in case he should feel a bit peckish while he watches his worldview burn. He states himself that he starts with the Bible, and that was his first mistake. He ascribes existence to creation by an omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent creature, despite the logical inconsistency of such a thing. The prompt for the response below was predicated by this statement by the subject to a different poster. After fielding that poster made the claim that he had a relevant degree.
You have a degree and still can't differentiate real science from the religion of evolution. They must give degrees to anyone in your town these days.
Kage promised him a response, which I will now read in full, with a few touches of my own. After that, I'm going to address another thing he stole from the Hovinds directly, and do my own breakdown. Your argument that evolution is a religion fails, in that it doesn't have one of those supreme beings. Because it doesn't require one to make it work as described and as observed in both the lab and the wild. Ring species are a classic example, and they happen often. All you need is several different populations that split off by a succession of barriers. After several dozen generations at each step, the various bits of the ring get less and less fertile with other populations as you get further down the line. If you start with A, and keep splitting until you get to, say, L, then you get a variety of various breeding possibilities, including A and L not being able to breed with one another at all. A and B can, and K and L, but not A and L. You could, potentially, start breeding them back into the populations from one end of the chain, but your chances of recombining them all into a single population is remote at best. A and L may look similar, but they are distinct species, and B through K are various transitional forms. All from the redistribution of various alleles in subtly different environments by populations that are isolated in some form or another. You see the same thing in languages. As another example, if you put a bunch of Spaniards on the other side of a mountain range from the rest of the Spaniards, eventually they develop their own lingo, and a single language diverges into two. In fact, this exact thing happened. The isolated population in question are the Portuguese. The same thing happened between French and Spanish, and French from Italian, which is itself a bastardization between Latin and the languages of the other peoples that inhabited the areas that Rome conquered. English as we know it now is very little like its original form as well. That's actually a case of Mongolization, not the technical term, between all the other languages of Europe and Western Asia as well as its original form. Once you get to Middle English, it starts sounding familiar, and they used something very akin to the way it is now for the King James, which settled the final form of the language. It has developed since, but is nowhere near as fluid as it was earlier. Daniel Webster formalized the vocabulary and spellings, but that's a different matter for another day. Every English speaker knows quite a bit more than you'd think of the Bible, as most of the common sayings we use today first appear in print in the King James. A great many appeared in common use well prior to that, no doubt, but since that time, almost all of those concepts can be traced to it, as well as the bulk of our cultural norms and tropes. As fiction, the amount of suspension of disbelief required to accept it is massive, but taken in chunks and put to a different tune, we can teach the same lessons in much more palatable ways. As a history book, it's absolutely abysmal. Most of it can be dismissed based on the evidence we have to hand, and more is being gathered daily. As a moral guide, it's even worse. Slavery, torture, murder of the defenseless and outright genocide are order of the day, and it only gets worse from there. The Romans were actually a civilizing presence to the barbarity of previous times, and even then you have stories that are beyond fantastic. As a science text, it possesses a decidedly negative value. Deity is not to be questioned at any time, and that precludes any sort of rational thought. Questioning the origins of anything leads to the sort of special pleading arguments that you've offered. In fact, that's pretty much all you've got. Morality as I understand the term doesn't come from the Bible as such. Social behavior is an evolutionary trait that is codified in various legal systems and holy texts for mass consumption. Biblical law is based nearly entirely on the Code of Hammurabi, including the idea of taxes. The central authority collects goods and services to redistribute as needed to make sure that everyone can be covered. It gets better than that, because with taxes, the government can secure goods and services that don't benefit the population directly, but instead serve to defend the population from threats both from within and without. We have arable land, but those guys over there don't, and they're violent assholes to boot. We need to train our own violent assholes so they don't take our shit without paying for it. From within, you're talking about keeping the unwilling distribution of goods from going on, and maintaining population levels by making examples of people that break laws designed to protect the population as a whole. Does that sound familiar somehow? I bet it does. Without these sureties in place for those who are less adept at hunting or farming, then you get a stagnation of thought, as the smarter ones die off due to a lack of calories. The people that can think work together, in an interesting sort of meritocracy that produces progress in the form of advances in technology, to meet the needs of the population. It's not my fault you're a deluded psychopath with a fear of the unknown and one of the most severe cases of Dunning-Kruger syndrome I've seen yet. I've seen a couple of more recently that are down about your level, but that's for a different video. I have two more things to cover from this particular moron before I wrap up, and they both have to do with earlier posts he made, one asking about which version of evolution he was talking about, and the other a list of denials of specific claims that he can't back up. Just for funsies, we're going to do them in the order posted. A tad more background, the dumb comment hell poster, having taken the bait as far as trying to show the evidence of evolution, provided our subject with a list of things that do indeed support the theory. I'm going to put his responses to the list up first, and then take them apart one by one.
1. Comparative anatomy. There is no comparative anatomy that proves any life kind evolved into any other kind. And if you're stupid enough to say such an ignorant thing, then please give a comparative anatomical example that proves such.
We can see them in more than a few places. With the exception of insects, arachnids, and other similar invertebrate types with hard exoskeletons, all animals on the planet have just 4 limbs, and the overwhelming majority of those have 5 digits towards the end. The exceptions to the rule are hoofed critters, which have the rest of the general skeletal structure of every other critter, and birds, of which there are examples that have claws on the wings. Bats have a finger spread process as ribbing for their wings, fur, and even mammary glands. As you get more complex critters, you start seeing more and more of the same sorts of features in the individual populations. I can compare the skeleton of any amphibian, reptile, bird or mammal, and determine that they arose here on Terra. A truly alien creature wouldn't have the same set of skeletal features, they'd be at least subtly different. Would not an elephant benefit from having a hardened plate on its underside to protect the soft belly? Why would any serious designer put a playground in a sewer district?
2. DNA analysis goes against evolution. Are you in 6th grade? You didn't know this?
DNA analysis is in fact legal proof of evolution. The greatest test of evolution in recent memory was the uncovering of the reason modern humans are missing a pair of chromosomes that apes have. They found a fusion point on our 2nd chromosome, which combined the functions of 2 ape chromosomes. Evolution predicted such an event, and it was indeed found. Descent with modification, refining populations to suit challenges of the environment.
3. Modern descendants. Seriously, kid? Descendants from what? Their mother and father, right?
We can gene sequence extant critters and determine where they fall with respect to any other life form. Or did you not know that plants have DNA too?
4. Taxonomy. Concerning evolution only exists as imaginative drawings, otherwise they only show like kinds of life.
Taxonomy follows from the development from less complex to more complex life form. Aaron R.A. can educate you on the details. Besides which you and your ilk have yet to define a biblical kind on any level. Kent can't even agree with himself on that, and Eric has another definition entirely.
5. Paleoecology. Only shows fossils of past life. It does not and cannot prove any transitional life progress. Because it's dead, genius.
Of course it's dead. If it weren't, we could study it directly. We can see what sort of things existed prior from a rather extensive fossil record, and construct a rough timeline of events. Every critter is a transitional form, as there really isn't a baseline for. This is the ideal version of that anywhere but inside the vacuum chamber you call a skull.
6-Biology is the study of the interactions between the Earth's biosphere and the lithosphere. Please do tell how this proves evolution. You are trying way too hard and failing so hard. Lol.
Way to check out Wikipedia there, bub. Too bad you missed the very next line. Biology examines biotic, hydrologic, and terrestrial systems in relation to each other, to help understand the Earth's climate, oceans, and other effects on geologic systems. We can track the rate at which things changed on our planet by examining rock samples for changes in mineral content and so forth. The balance I will leave to Wildwood Claire, as she's currently working on a series describing banded iron formations.
7-Carbon dating. The skull and ribs of the same dog was sent to 2 separate labs for radiocarbon dating. They were dated 20,000 years apart. Obviously you also know very little about carbon dating.
You left out most of the information we need there to determine what happened with those samples, and most likely that was due to contamination of the objects prior to sample preparation. It's not unheard of, and in fact, a simple coat of lacquer, or preservation attempts with something like formaldehyde can skew results by a considerable margin. The samples could also have been recent, which might throw off the readings, or very old, and not have enough carbon to get a reading at all. Sending any sample to a lab that is more than 40,000 years old or so will get all manner of wacky results. Especially if someone didn't bother to give the presumptive age of the fossil in question, or misrepresented it in some way. My expectation is that it was a combination of all of the above causes. Samples with a presumptive age more than 30,000 years old usually get some other sort of radiometric dating rather than carbon-14. Nothing older than 40 to 45,000 years old is ever dated that way. By then, all the carbon has been leached away, and other minerals are present. Of course, being an idiot, you wouldn't know that. One more thing to round back up your jaxes, and I'll have done for the moment. In a response to yet another poster, our subject to this to say,
You don't even know much about evolution, do you? Sigh. Now I have to backtrack for you. Answer these questions and tell me what version of evolution are you talking about? 1-Cosmic evolution, 2-Chemic evolution, 3-Stellar evolution, 4-Organic evolution, 5-Macro evolution, 6-Micro evolution.
Anyone that's been paying attention to the Creationists and their usual song and dance has seen this one at least a few times, and it's just as easy to destroy it right. So let's break it down for the crowd that hasn't. Cosmic evolution has nothing to do with evolution, which is the unifying theory of the life sciences. Life doesn't exist at this point, so evolution cannot be applied. That's a rather robust area of physics called cosmology. Chemical evolution, again, not evolution, as no life exists. This is cosmology, physics, and chemistry. Stellar evolution, still the purview of cosmology and physics. No life here either. Organic evolution, organic in the scientific sense are molecules that contain carbon, which is stunningly common in the universe after the first generation of stars blew up. Water is even more common, as it is one of the simplest compounds found in nature. Still no life, but you can get the materials you need for abiogenesis. This is strictly physics and chemistry. Macro and microevolution, these are the same thing, and they separate them commonly to account for changes we can see while still giving their magic sky fairy breathing room. Dogs don't give birth to cats, because their last common ancestor was a several tens of million years back, and the divergence turned out to be permanent. The cat genome is 38 chromosomes, and the dog 78. There's no way that works. In fact, evolution specifies that such a thing cannot happen. Nor will you get a croco duck, as birds and extant reptiles are on different branches even further back. Birds derived from dinosaurs, and crocodilians from an earlier reptilian form. It is more likely that a human would give birth to a Neanderthal, as the human genome does seem to hold a percentage for their DNA. Same with chimps and other great apes. It's been said before, and I'm saying it again. You're an ape. Right now. So am I, and everyone you've ever met. We're better at using tools and thinking our way around problems than your average chimp or gorilla, but we are, in fact, apes. We share a majority of our features in common with them, and not a bit of it requires a creator deity. You let fear of some vague punishment rule your life, and that ain't able to make the best of what you have now, in the hopes of a reward that will more than likely never come. So then, dear subject, provide evidence that gods can exist. Never mind yours, as its narrative is so hopelessly snarled that we can conclude readily that he cannot exist as described. Because even if you're successful in refuting evolution, you still have no evidence for this creator deity of yours. To assume that if one is false the other must be true is a gross oversimplification compounded by a false dichotomy. The alien hypothesis is more likely, and even you'll scoff at that. It's not about belief, it's about evidence. Bring some to the table that doesn't involve your holy book and then we'll talk. Until then, either wake up and smell the coffee, or fuck off back under your rock. Should you decide to change your name and come join the rest of us, you'll find it's not all bad. With the exception of little closet freak like you, you won't even have to deal with all that much bullshit for it. Just a thought. I know I promised that would be the last bit, but the events that transpired after the time the audio was done require I add a touch more, just so this bit doesn't get lost. You'll find the text in the thread, but I'm going to read it to you here as well. There you go, dismissing arguments on irrelevant details again. You cast aspersions about your opinion of my age, for which you are off by at least a factor of 3, and use it to knock down the army of straw men you built in the quote mine. If I had verifiable evidence that gods of any description were even possible, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. You declare that I've lied about something I don't have. I grew up seeing Christianity in action, and I must say that by the time I was 5, I saw it for the scam it is. 40,000 different flavors of just your branch doesn't suggest a single religion as much as it does a large collection of loosely affiliated cults. Some of these variants have a single church, and adherents numbered in the millions. They center around a monolithic personality that is not to be questioned under any circumstances. Pat Robertson, Jimmy Swaggart, Ted Haggard, and a handful of others, all reportedly preaching the same things inside stadium-sized churches, collecting money from those that need it most tax-free. Tell me why your all-knowing, all-powerful creator deity that's going to get mad if you don't kiss his ass incessantly allows this sort of shit to go on? You don't have an answer. Kent Hovind is a tax-evading fraud, Ken Ham is a con man, and Carl Barth is a reincarnation of fucking P.T. Barnum. Yet you believe them without so much as a question, to the point where any challenge to your presuppositions is met with ridicule and accusations of childishness. I can do simple experiments to verify most of what I was taught in high school, and well beyond. In fact, they showed us the experiments, and openly encouraged more experimentation within the bands of safety. We were shown what predictive power is, and encouraged to test things that we thought were questionable. My science teachers told me to question everything, including what they told us. You expect us to accept the Bible at face value, despite all the evidence that it is hopelessly flawed. I can't do that for you any more than I would for Ken Ham as the sole member of the editorial board for a journal that must by explicit declaration begin with a specific presupposition. That's the reverse of what science does. We start with a pile of related facts, and slowly figure out how those things fit together, and how we might test that. If we can test, we do. If we cannot, then we work at it until we can, and then do. If the results match predictions, then we publish, and someone else has a crack at it. They're not looking to prove their version of whatever it is, they're looking to disprove the one they have. If they can crack it, then it gets modified, or if the flaws are fatal, the theory is discarded altogether. That process never stops. Even when the support for a particular theory is so overwhelming as to be unassailable, there are still tests each time a new fact or observation is found. A proper skeptical scientist, when confronted with the evidence that some theory or another is wrong, will admit it and change their thinking to match observation and experiment. That's called progress, you three-tuned excuse for a fetid ocean of vomitus. Your unchanging Bible is the antithesis of that, and I for one want no part of it without some damn good evidence, which you somehow seem reluctant to provide. I wonder why that might be? For those of you dropping by the channel for the first time, feel free to click on the links in the description, rate, subscribe, and comment. I haven't named our subject, but if you follow the Google Plus link below, you'll probably figure out who he is rather quickly. Strange as it may seem, we do read all of your comments, and we respond to as many as we can. Our track record is pretty good so far, so do please join in the conversation. This video is a taste of the new format, in which we select one or more claims made by anywhere from 1 to 3 posters or videos, and do a detailed demolition of those claims. Do feel free to comment on that as well. If you really want us to go back to the original format, then we will. Although I still intend to do that sort of debunk when the situation calls for it. The next spirit science debunk is in the queue, as well as some other perennial favorites. We're also going to try and start bringing on some other YouTubers for guest spots, to cover some of the details that we may not be able to cover adequately. Until next time, be safe, and think critically.